Yeah, hi and welcome to this closing keynote of this scary version of Vox Days Cluj. And I'm very happy that I can be here to talk about, well, an I think interesting topic. And I love especially the theme of this conference and this scary outfits that we have. I actually tried to get some fangs as well for Dracula, but then I figured I probably couldn't speak properly on giving a presentation. So, yeah. This topic is about how to be more productive as a developer, 7 principles that will boost your developer productivity. And about myself, my name is Sebastian, born and raised in Munich, and I work for this company called IBM, and I typically am on the enterprise software side, but that's also so some Java titles involved here. But the most important fact for this conference presentation about me is not even on the slide. That is, well, I'm German, right? And this enables me to talk about this topic. This is what we're known for, right? We Germans are efficient, right? Fun fact about Germany, there ain't no fun in Germany. Go back to work. Yes, I agree. So here are some principles how to make you more efficient as a software developer. And the first thing of the 7 principles is how to embrace automation. And that is an important one because it means using the computer in the correct way, right? Computers are not very smart, despite of AI. They're actually very dumb, and they can do, well, these dumb, simple things reliably and very, very quickly, right? So that is what computers are good at. Humans actually are not very good at doing a lot of manual type of work because humans, they get bored. Humans are slow in comparison, right? Humans make mistakes. Humans are far better at doing creative work, at thinking. And that is actually what we should embrace. We should use the computer to, execute automation. And my point here is automation can come in many, many forms, whether it's something like shell scripts, or if you think of a factory of some automated processes, but it's also very, very tiny forms of automation. For example, shortcuts or some macros. And one thing you also should embrace is wherever you find them, use some shortcuts, right? There are a lot of shortcuts, mostly keyboard shortcuts, in the programs that we use, and specifically, what we should use is the IDE, right? So here's an IDE that I use very often and that I love. It's called IntelliJ, but all of the examples I will show you are, in this case, specific to Java, but it's not about Java. It's actually applicable for all kinds of technologies and all kinds of things and tools you use. So how did I create this class? Public class hello, that was already a shortcut, that was already some form of automation. I used an IDE feature to create a class, so I don't have to create the file and write these 3 lines of code myself. And the same is true for all kinds of things. So, what was that? That was also some kind of automation, right? I didn't write public, static, void, main, string. Oh God, you see, you make mistakes and things like that yourself. It's just way faster to use some, in this case, that is called live template for it. The same is true if you use all kinds of IDE features. So for example, refactoring. Especially IntelliJ, what I'm showing you here, is very, very powerful and mature at these refactoring features. So for example, if I have something like, I have some code that does this, and I have another code that does that, and I do something else, assuming we want to refactor these 3 lines of code. Let's say, okay, that's too complex, it's not readable. We want to, for example, outsource D into a private method. So what you typically do, right, you go down and say something like private, static, void, do this and that, right? You write a new method, and then, of course, you copy-paste program this down here, and then don't forget to call the method over there, and then we're done, right? But there's some automation, there's actually some shortcut that can do the same action in a somewhat faster way, right? So let's reverse this. If you go here and say, okay, actually I can do right-click, refactor, extract method, and then I can extract that into a method, do this and that, and then you're done. And your IDE does not forget to, call that method and things like that. And then, if you've done that, and if you use that specific refactoring shortcut, after a while you might get bored of doing a right-click, refactor, extract method, and then you see, oh, actually I can also call Control-Alt-M to do the same thing, which is just that, if I can type. So let's rename this. Renaming also, you should know these features. And then it's just way faster, right? Do this and that, and I can do the same for do something else. And yeah, it will already, because my IDE is actually intelligent enough to say, oh, by the way, if you would change that method, oh God, that's actually a new feature. I haven't seen it in this way. Oh, no, I did not want to do that. Probably hit the wrong key. Oh yeah, this is what I wanted to do. Do something else. So sometimes you can get overwhelmed, and then it will, already ask you for a signature change because, it's intelligent enough that you can change this or that. But that is just a point. You might want to use IDE features that enable you to do things faster. Let's do this, let's revert that. And there are many, many features for all kinds of actions that are just, accessible in a much easier way. And what it is, that is a form of automation. That is just using, in this case, that tool in the correct way and letting the computer do what it can do way faster than you can and more reliable. The same is true for what I showed you before of these live templates. So the point is we want to become a power user of these tools, especially mainly the IDE, because as a developer we spend a lot of time in that. And also we want to define some of these actions for the technology that we use. So for example, I use a lot of enterprise Java, so that means I write a lot of injections and then inject something like some bean. And what you probably saw, I did not write @inject and selecting the correct import and things like that, which is just cumbersome and error prone. I defined a live template, actually just for @inject plus the correct import. It sounds like some overhead or some tiny improvement, but if you type that a lot, it actually makes a lot of sense. Same is true for @persistent context entity manager, which I typed many, many times. And if you just keep typing that yourself, it's just way faster to define these small helpers. Same with post-construct methods or predestroy method, right? Or let's inject some managed executor service. All these things are just way faster if you can use what here is called live template. So the same is true for, well, not only Java, but other resources as well. Who of you uses YAML? All right, awesome. Who of you likes YAML? Oh, a few. Interesting. Anyway, if we write YAML, for example, for Kubernetes, it's the same thing. I don't know who of you can remember the structure of a Kubernetes deployment out of your head. Well, I can't. But if I write something for a Hello World service, for example, then you can define a live template for that. I defined that in IntelliJ because I write these a lot, and you define your own live templates for whatever technology you use. The same was true here for Enterprise Java, which is what I use a lot. You might use something else, but you should also define these type of things for the specific technology that you use just to get faster. So just ask yourself, what are the boilerplate snippets that I keep typing myself all over again, and see whether there's an IDE, a live template or feature for it, and if not, define one. Works in all of the IDEs. I really like IntelliJ, that's what I use, but in general, you just should try to get faster with that by using shortcuts. Then another big thing where automation lies is the command line, especially the Unix command line, right? If we use a Unix-based system, we can do pretty much everything that a computer can do by using the command line. And well, I use the command line now for pretty much everything. That's my command line. And I kid you not, I don't even have a file explorer anymore. I even use the command line for that. So, I use things like copy and move and remove commands for this. And well, just a few pointers how to make you more productive using the command line. So the nice story about the command line is you can type, you can use your keyboard to do all kinds of things, and you can reuse these commands for automation, for example. So who of you uses Bash? Hands up. Okay, a few of you. Who of you uses a different shell? For example, Z shell, which is what I use. Okay, so in general, I don't want to be too religious about which choice you want to do, but I want to give you just some incentive to check out Z shell instead. instead of bash and switch to that. Why? Well, first of all, Z shell supports everything that bash also can do and has the same command structure. You can just basically type the commands in the same way. But why I use Z shell is mainly because of two features. And they sound very small in the beginning, but first of all, you can switch directories without typing cd. I know, it sounds like a small improvement, but once you do something like /temp and you can just switch to that temp directory or to your home directory and back, it's just way faster than hitting cd each and every time. Once you get used to it, you never want to switch back. The second thing, that even bigger improvement for navigation, is you can auto-expand multiple directory hierarchies by hitting tab once. So instead of saying /home/ I don't know, workspaces / Sebastian Daschner, so what I type, I type the beginning tab as Daschner tab modern enterprise Java, source tab main tab Java tab. What you can do instead, you can say, oh, I want to go to workspaces, Sebastian Daschner modern enterprise Java, source main Java. Hit tab once, hit enter, and then I'm there. And once you get used to that, you can navigate really, really quickly and you never want to go back. All right, test project. And then there are a few shortcuts that you just enable you to navigate quickly here, right? You probably have heard of Control L for clearing that quicker. I also defined Control K that just displays the current directory, or J to have that in a hierarchy, or H for more hierarchy and things like that. And once you define these things, it's just very quickly to navigate in your command line, and it's actually much faster to use than a browser. But what is really, really powerful on the command line are shell aliases. That is really helpful. Why? What we typically use the command line for as Java developers is something like maven clean package, right? Or then Andres is sitting in the back, he might say, oh, you actually don't need maven clean, right? You just say maven, oh God, I cannot type, maven package, right? Or, other things like that. But why do you type maven clean package, or what a lot of people do, maven, oh God, you see how bad I am at typing, maven clean install, you keep typing that all over again, right? But at some point you might say, hey, wait a second, I can actually define a shell alias to type that a little bit faster, right? Like maven clean install or maven clean package. Or if we're honest, then it's actually maven clean install and skip the tests, right? That's what we type. And that is just much faster by defining shell aliases for these things. Or, you use Git on the command line? Hands up? Yeah, very good. So how many times do you type git status, right? Or, git commit. Why not type, something faster, like git status, git commit, or git push into the current branch, or, git push pull with rebase from the current branch, and then, push whatever you changed. And whatever. Who of you uses Docker, right? How many times do you type Docker build, right? Or Docker PS, or Docker push, Docker pull, whatever, right? Or kube control for Kubernetes. Any Kubernetes users? Yeah, kube control apply, kube control get pods, kube control get pod in all namespaces, kube control get services. I don't know how much time we have, but we could, continue that all day. All the aliases that you keep using, or all the commands that you keep typing yourself, a good starting point is looking at your history file, and then sorting that by usage of all of the commands in your bash or Z shell history. And these are the commands that you definitely want to define aliases for, because that's just way more convenient. And you keep yourself keep yourself from typing a lot. And that is the most important thing that you should do in the command line. And then what you just saw, you can get really, really fast and productive at it. Then, of course, if we think of automation, then bash scripts, right? Shell scripts are the main part of doing automation. The nice story, if you use the command line, is, well, how to write automation on the command line. It's actually very simple. You can just build project, you can just write a file with some bin bash, whatever, and then type all of the commands. Yeah, you see, this is why I have aliases, that you would do in order to build your project, in order to run your project, in order to copy something to your application server, whatever you do, here, write it as a shell script, make it executable, and there you have your automation and you can just run it, right? That is basically all the automation you do on the command line. And especially if you use a Unix-based system, you can pretty much have all of the commands and you can automate everything, right? Like this presentation setup with my different workspaces I have, I always set it up, 2 minutes before a presentation with a script, right? Shell script. You can pretty much script everything, especially on Linux or on a Unix-based system, right? So with that, you can be really fast, you can be really creative what to automate, and that helps you a lot. And if we follow that, then we get just more and more automation, and ultimately, well, where we go? We had code as code, right? So if you have some business logic, what your application does, you implement it as code, which is very good. For us, we can write it as plain text, we can put it into version control, and the computer can automate it, right? Can execute it. Configuration as code, same thing. If we have XML or something like that, it's much more manageable than configuring something by hand by moving our mouse. Same as infrastructure as code. If you think of these nice Kubernetes YAMLs or Docker files, that is just a way how to define as code how our infrastructure should look like, and then letting the computer automate it, right? And basically, we can have everything as code. We can have documentation as code, as plain text documentation formats, right? Like ASCII doc, and then having a pipeline that delivers that as a website. We can have our computer setup as code. I put my dot files into GitHub and have my setup as scripts. And then literally when I bought this computer, it took me like 15 minutes to set everything up, including the applications that I use, including my settings, right? You just point them to the correct Git repositories and then let the scripts run through and do all the magic, and you don't have to do it manually. That's just way faster and way more fun because it's automated. We don't have to do it ourselves manually. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty much using the computer in the way how it's supposed to be used. That's a good principle to follow. 3-strike principle. So whenever we see something that might be automated, well, the first time we just do it, we just execute some stuff manually. The second time when we see a task that is quite cumbersome, that is manual work, well, then we get a little bit annoyed, but we still do it manually, right? And then the third time we say, well, no, I won't do it. I will write some automation that does the job for me, right? And then the fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, you just save some time because then you don't do the job anymore. You just execute the automation that you wrote, right? Like some automated shell scripts and things like that. And this makes you just way faster. Testing, that's also a good topic. We should write our tests that we can, well, execute them in an automated way, of course, but also we should have the verification being done in an automated way, right? Once we test our project, we should not be required as a human to look over it and to say, okay, yeah, this works or does not work, right? Everything can be automated and verified in an automated way. Even if you do some UI development, you can have some screenshots, you can compare some videos, whether all of that works as expected, and then a computer will execute it much, much faster than a human would do. If you take that further, that principle, then you basically end up at continuous delivery, right? The way how to deliver our software in a well-defined and automated approach with proper automated testing being built in, and then, well, that's pretty much the requirement for shipping software in a modern world. Then we can just, ship our software with reliability, with quality being built in, and with speed, because it's just so much faster, and that is the way to go. All right, moving on to the next principle. Principle of focus, and that we should eliminate our context switches. If you think of processors like CPUs, processors have to do some context switches by switching from one process to another, and they come with a context switch penalty, right, in order to clear the execution pipeline and things like that. So we should avoid context switches. As humans, we actually have way, way bigger context switches. And they also come in a big form and in small forms. Can be as big as a colleague coming in and asking you some questions that distract you from the current task that you're working on. And can be small things like a menu that is just hard to use, where your brain has to make a small switch in the flow of execution of thinking. Or if, for example, you have to move your hands position and things like that. And especially the hand position, is important because if you want to be productive, I claim, take your mouse and throw it away and never use it again. You should use your keyboard because you're a developer, right? Because why? Well, mostly because of context switches. You keep typing, all the time anyway because you type code, and then switching from that position of typing, to any other position, like to your mouse over here or over there, it just takes way more time, right? And you're not as fast. So keyboard usage for the win. We should optimize to use our keyboard. And if we're honest, we know that as a developer, that you're just way more productive once you know some shortcuts and all these type of things. So I talked about shortcuts before. And also it will make you more effective to use a proper keyboard. So get yourself a proper mechanical keyboard, ideally. I don't want to do some advertising, but this is just some recommendations or experiences that I liked. That is a US brand with a German name, Das Keyboard. Das is the article. That is a mechanical keyboard with cherry switches that I used to use a lot. If you like your coworkers, you take the cherry brown switches, not the blue switches, or other ones. The blue are very loud and clicky. I had that before, and then I had to switch back to another keyboard. It was too loud. I got complaints. Or actually, right now I use this Realforce, this Topper, Japanese brand with capacitive switches. Also very, very nice. Whatever you prefer, just try out a few ones. But the point is, you should invest some money to get a proper device. I always compare it with some craft worker job where you get some professional tool, right? And not just go to the next do-it-yourself store to get the cheapest tools available, because it's a profession. We want to do it professionally. We want to invest some money to get an actual good tool, because you use it many, many hours a day. You stand in front of that thing for many hours, and it really makes a difference in typing if you get a proper keyboard. One more thing, talking about keyboards, is keyboard layout. I had a look at the Romanian keyboard layout, and I think it switched at a point over time. So now you're actually able to type in things like curly braces, right? Without doing some weird hand movements. So the German keyboard is pretty bad at that, which I used in the past. So you have to type like alt graphics plus 7 or 8 or something to get the curly braces that you need in Java. That's actually why I now use the US keyboard layout for, I type English and programming special characters all the time. And if you say, oh, by the way, I, for some reason, actually have to type some Ös or S or sharp S and all other characters at some point, you can actually do that in the US keyboard layout by having the international keyboard layout with all graphics and no dead keys, where you then can actually hit alt graphics for typing, as you can see, way more characters with accents and all kinds of stuff, and still type these special characters but have proper characters for programming like these available. So I think that's a good trade-off, and that just makes you more productive. Then another thing, that is an interesting topic, Vim and that weird text editor. Why? So, small story, I started using Vim, I think it's almost 5 years ago, something like that, after chatting with a colleague at a conference who used Vim. And once you look at it as a non-Vim user and seeing a Vim professional magically jumping around his cursor from A to B where they want it to be, it's almost like your thoughts are controlling your cursor and your text movements. Once you looked into that and seen that, then you actually want to have a look at it. And it actually turned out to be my biggest improvement in productivity in my career as a software developer, to have a look at this weird editor that nobody knows how to exit. So the reason why it's a little bit weird at the beginning and why it's really, really productive is it basically makes use of that principle of eliminating context switches by eliminating these hand movements. So it's based on basically the principle that you're not supposed to move your hands. You always keep them on the home row, F and J, and they stay there. And in order that this works, actually, it has multiple modes, and in default, it starts in the normal mode. This is the confusing part, because you cannot type. You have to type a special character, like I for insert, and then you can actually type. And then if you hit escape, that, by the way, you should remap, right? So I remapped it on caps lock. So, it's just easier reachable than, doing this, again, context switch, right, like this movement. And then you can just, use your keyboard in the normal, like F and K and, H and L and, jump down, up and down again to move around, right? So you can do this, and the next thing is what you do composable commands. So you basically can have a movement action combined with an action. So for example, substitute, and then you have a movement like word forward, word backward, line down, or something like that. So substitute, move forward to another word, like goodbye, which then you can repeat that action and things like that. And you can just jump around and move much quicker than using the cursors, for example, or using the mouse, because then you don't have to switch. And if you get used to these movements commands, you can go really quickly, right? So you can do this, and that's actually also the reason why I have this weird line numbering here. That is also relative line movements. So if I say I want to jump down there or up here, like this, for example, I want to jump in this line, then I see, okay, it's 2 lines down, so I just hit 2 lines down and I can jump there very easily. Or from up there and I can jump 5 lines up and then I'm there. So you see that quite quickly, and then you can go really fast at navigating in your text. And that is just very helpful. And whether or not you like the Vim editor, that's actually not the point. You can have some, probably saw that, you can have some Vim emulation in your IDE as well. So this is why my IDE looks that weird. IDEA Vim also works in Eclipse and NetBeans. And then you're just much faster. And at some point, you then want to Vimify your whole environment, right? So I also use Vim, of course, on the command line. So I can type something like this, and then I can have escape and move around with this as well. And this is just so much faster to use than hitting backspace in order to delete something. I can just say, oh, move up here and then delete it from there or something like that. It's just way faster to move around. Then I actually recorded a video course on efficient keyboard usage that you can check out for free. It's on my blog. But in general, if you combine these principles, what I showed you before, for example, with live templates, you can get really quickly by using your editor for almost everything. So actually, when I write emails, I write them, no kidding, in Vim, right? You can do something like, live templates, dear sir or madam, hello world, dear Sebastian, copy paste that into your program and you're done, right? It's just so much faster than having an editor that is not that efficient to use. Anyway, you might have a look into that. Then, what is also very important as a developer in order to stay productive is these, context switches in order to not be distracted, right? So if you have some, turnaround cycle while your program and then it's being compiled and your tests run and things like that, you want to keep these turnaround cycles short. I want to quickly show you another tool that I showed you if you attended my other talk for Enterprise Java, but that's, again, just one example, which is a Liberty tool, Open Liberty, that basically has a development mode that hot swaps your code changes and compiles and replaces them immediately. So I have an Enterprise Java application that runs here that I can query using curl that, of course, says hello, or even sometimes hi. So, exciting, I know, hello world application here. This runs with Enterprise Java, but what it does here, it runs Liberty in a mode where I can actually have my code changes, that is just some Java component that says hi or hello, immediately by, applying and compiling them right away. So if I say hello, ! Then that process will go and immediately, and oops, I actually should query hello, in, less than half a second, update my application and just change that very quickly. So if I change ! To dot, then this is applied immediately, and I can even, run some tests in that way, and just have my, now it fails because I changed it, have my turnaround being very quickly. So I don't want to wait for, even 5 seconds or 10 seconds for that turnaround to happen. Why? Because of context switches, right? Programming is such a flow activity for humans, and we want that immediate feedback, and we want, to stay in that programming flow. If we have to wait just for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, what happens? Well, you know it, right? You get distracted, you take this little guy, check social media, you go to Facebook, to Slack, to whatever, and then it's over. Your productivity is gone. You want to stay in that focus mode, in that context of what you actually want to work on right now, and just remove all of these context switches. So that is just one example with Enterprise Java that you can use in order to stay more productive. You want to keep these turnaround cycles to less than 2 seconds. Otherwise, that's too distractive for whatever you do. Talking about more distractions, especially in offices. This is not a joke. I actually bought some, what they call it, noise cancellation, kind of. The noise cancellation headphones are also really, really good. What's also good is earplugs. You can even get some customizable earplugs for your ears where it's really dead silent if you use them. Also really good for airplanes, by the way. In order, you want to manage and kill out of all of the distractions in order to focus, right? And there are some distractions that occur, especially in a loud environment, in some noisy office, or whatever you kind of are sensitive to. So, for example, I'm kind of sensitive to noise, so I really love these type of noise cancellation or earplugs or Bose headphones, things like that. That helps me a lot in order to focus. What is also a thing is visual noise. If you have somebody like passing by, it's just distractive when something is moving around where you actually want to focus on some window. What you see here, that's actually not a presentation mode, besides the big font size. That's my normal setup, or actually, that would be my normal setup. You see the difference? That small little taskbar down there. So what I use a Linux environment with a tiling window manager where it's actually pretty much almost full screen. Why? Because no distractions. No notifications, no email client, no Slack, no nothing that will distract me. Even the operating system won't do any updates or something because I want to work. I don't want to be distracted right now. This is what I want to focus on, my IDE or maybe my browser, right? And that's here in full screen mode and everything else is just done. It's not there. And that is very, very important, especially when it comes to emails, especially when it comes to this horrible device. Probably the biggest negative impact in human productivity ever invented. Phones, especially phone notifications. So let me tell you, on every phone, every modern smartphone has a really, really important feature in order to boost your productivity and to eliminate distractions. It's called flight mode. Once you activate it, you will have no distractions, and it's great. You can put your phone away. There's even some science behind it. You should not put it on your desk, because whether or not you like it, whether it's put like this or face down, you will be distracted. It will cost some mental energy because you potentially could get a message. So put it in your backpack, put it away, and you can focus. If you work in a team and you have to be responsive to some emails and Slack and whatever, then you should talk to your team members and say, hey, by the way, I need to focus, I want to get that done. Then at least, you should set up some time where you say, okay, I won't be available for an hour or at least 30 minutes, where you're just totally offline, or not offline, but you close all of these email browser tabs and Slack and put your phone to flight mode, in which you can focus. And then afterwards, after these 30 minutes or 60 minutes, you get out of that zone and you check these super important emails and you respond to Slack emojis and something like that, where you are responsive if you have to, and then afterwards you can be, focused again. So then you can work with a team, and everybody usually understands that, and you still are productive and you still are responsive. Of course, it depends a lot on the working mode that you're in. Working environment is also a very, very important thing. That picture was taken at an ON conference I co-organized in Japan, which sounds pretty much like vacation, and it's also a very nice environment to be in. But believe it or not, these environments are way more productive than noisy offices. So if you work at, let's say, 4 hours in such an environment where it's quiet, where it's peaceful, where you can hear the ocean in the background, you will get stuff done way more than in any noisy environment. So that does make a difference, and I don't know whether in your company working remotely is a thing, but the environment does have a difference on that. And at least there's some workarounds like these if you cannot get there, but you just have to be aware of that issue that this does affect your productivity. And typically we know all of that, right, of the different environments. So just be aware of it and, trying to be a little bit more self-reflective in which environment you are productive. Might be even a loud or noisy coffee shop with a different environment, where it's totally unrelated to work, where you can really focus, or, you go somewhere, you might have, place in the woods, I don't know, with some good connectivity where it can work well. It really depends, but just be aware of that issue. Here's a nice comic. We have our developer dude here who is thinking of a very complex problem and some, decision tree solution, and what if I put this there, and, that should do the trick. And then, of course, what happens? Some coworker comes in and say, oh, hey, do you have a second? And what happens is, poof, everything that you put into that temporary working storage is gone, and you totally lost that context, that due to that context switch, your current focus mode, and you're lost in space, right? And of course, that other person says, oh, never mind, it actually wasn't that important, right? And this is, where you're unproductive, and this is where bugs happen, right? Because all of that corner cases that you just thought of in your temporary working memory are then gone because you got distracted and you forgot them, and then you didn't implement that corner case that handled your bug or whatever. So that is something to be aware of. All right, then next principle, we already talked about that a little bit. Every once in a while, take a step back and reflect and ask yourself, okay, what am I actually doing the whole day? Where do I spend my time off, right? Especially to recognize all of these small little things that do every single day, all of these actions, all of where you spend your time on. So for example, are there some actions that I could automate? So every morning when I go into the office, I always open up my browser and open up the same websites. Well, you can write some automation for it. That just opens your browser in that mode, and there you go, right? For example, to identify some automation. Are there some new shell aliases that I could define and use? Right? Are there some live templates for code that I keep typing all over again? So all these things which are in effect a long-term investment. So this is what we should think of it. Every automation we write, shortcuts we define or learn, testing that we define, tooling that we learn is a long-term investment in that regard. Another interesting one, principle of don't make me think, or at least don't make me think twice. Every time when you have this déjà vu moment where you say, oh, I solved that problem before, I've been here, right? So I don't know, how do I deploy to my test staging environment? So I know I solved that problem last week and I cannot remember, how I did it. So, you kind of do that work again. You have to make that thought process again because, for example, you did not document it. Or, in order to be more productive, you can define some processes. Something like inbox 0 is just, a process. What do you do in this situation? If, else, and less than, 2 minutes, I immediately reply to that email. Otherwise, I can just put it there. You can define these processes and then automate them. And automation is some form of documentation, right? So how do I deploy to my test environment? Well, you can have a look at the automation that you should have written, and it's right there. And that is also the documentation of what happens, right? And that will enable you to think less. Right? Next thing, for things that you think about only once, is keeping a to-do list. No, really. Yes, Captain Obvious, I'm really telling you to keep a to-do list. And there are some, experiences or tips and tricks related to that I can tell you. So actually, during my career, I wrote, I think, at least 3 to-do list apps myself, right? This is what we developers do, right? Like if we manage some tasks, and of course, there are only so and so many million to-do list applications out there, so of course we have to write our own because it's much better. Actually, there's one that I still use, but anyway. But it's not about which to-do list app to use. It's more about the approaches. And actually, you can do something in a very basic way. You can actually have something like a, plain text file. Something like, you notice the automation to insert the current date? Yeah. Shortcuts for the win. You can have something like a text file, like in the ASCII doc format. To-dos, do this, do that. One important thing, sort them by priority. So you can resort them depending on what you do. And another thing, keep a done list where you put them down there after you've done it, right? So that is helpful to keep to these things, to always prioritize and to start from scratch. So if you have a new day, then start with a blank state and think about, okay, what I'm going to do tomorrow, right? Why? Because otherwise, if you have these to-do lists with hundreds of things that you have not done yet, and where you just add on it and append on it, and it's append only, you never put things out of there, you only append new tasks, well, what happens? You're immediately distracted and overwhelmed once you look into these lists, right? You open up a to-do list and you just immediately want to close it again because you see all of these new things, and that's not a proper, context of one day where you can, work on these things appropriately. So write a to-do list for a day or for maybe a week. Plan your week, what you're supposed to do, or maybe a sprint cycle or whatever cycle you want to work in. And that is really, really helpful, right? And then if you write this in such a way, you can have things like, oh no, what did I actually do? I don't know. If your manager asks, what did you do last month? And that structure is super easy to do, right? So it doesn't have to be a fancy program. It's much more about the process that you use in order to manage these tasks and things you do, right? In the same way, I don't know if you know that issue, if that happens to you. If I program or if I'm working on something, then sometimes out of the blue, out of nowhere, I get these thoughts like, oh, I still have to do this, right? Or I still have to contact that person, I still have to do this task. And now actually I don't want to get distracted, right? So I'm working on my code here right now. And then what happens if I would go somewhere and open up my to-do list to put in that thought to not forget it, right? Because I think the human brain is not a storage unit, it's a processing unit, right? So memorization takes effort, so I just want to put it in somewhere. If I would open my to-do list right now, then I immediately get distracted, right? Because I see these hundreds of things that have not been done yet, and I say, oh yeah, I still have to contact this person, I have to do this, right? And then I would be distracted because I actually want to focus on work on my code, right? So what I do instead, again, automation and context switches, I define some, script or thing, do this super important thing. And then what happens, I hit enter, and it's stored somewhere, it's appended at the end of my to-do list, and I can have a look at it later in the day, right? But the point is, I have peace of mind, I can relax, I know it's there, and I'm not getting distracted, and I can continue working on my code, what I actually want to do, right? So these are a few tips and tricks in order to be more effective in managing your to-dos, but in general, that just helps you mostly to relax and to be able to focus what you want to focus on. Then another interesting principle of knowing your craft. It's basically knowing what you're doing. As funny as it sounds, because it will make you more productive, obviously, if you really know that technology that you use well, right? Computers as well as programming languages are getting better and better at abstraction, right? So now, in order to create a, HTTP server that does some transaction handling and talks to the database, it requires not much, right? Just a few lines of code, because these frameworks getting so abstracted that it's very dense, the code that you write. You don't have to do much, define a few annotations or whatever, but you have to know which annotations, right? Otherwise, it will never work. It doesn't matter how much time you spend. So it really helps to understand your frameworks, and it helps you to invest some time to really know what you're doing. And that especially means read the documentation. No, really, I mean it, right? I cannot tell you how many times I tried to, play around on some problem and basically Googled and Stack Overflowed my way around some errors that happened and things like that. And it took 2 or 3 hours until I finally said, okay, now I give up. I will have a look at the documentation, right? And then, of course, after 15 minutes of reading, I'm like, oh, of course, it cannot work like that, right? Because I used the concept differently, or I didn't understand this and that part, right? And it saves a lot of time to actually read whatever, you're using, the concepts behind Docker, behind Kubernetes, to understand what is a service and deployment, or whatever you're using, and it will make you more effective. That's also a long-term investment as a developer. And, well, you just will get better at whatever you're doing. And in the same way, we should communicate that back to mostly our coworkers in order, well, to mostly share some knowledge. And that involves writing documentation. Yes, really, I mean it. So not even out of being nice, being a nice person and out of altruism, even for yourself, right? So I don't know how many times, I looked at code I wrote not half a year ago, but even 2 weeks ago, and I had no clue what I did back then, right? So document whatever you do, document the motivation, why you choose a specific solution, and this will help not only you, but also your coworkers. And in the same way, share some knowledge, right? Might be a presentation that you do, might be a brown bag session in your company, might be you have some informal, blog and write some article to create some tutorials and things like that. And actually, this is the reason why I started my blog in the first place. Many more times than I would like to admit, I tried to find the solution for some problem, and I Googled, and then I actually ended up at my own blog with a blog post that I wrote 2 years ago that was the solution to the problem, which I then had to admit that actually I solved this before, but at least I shared the knowledge for originally somebody else, but then even it came back to myself, so it helps you. And of course, teaching requires you to improve your own knowledge, right? Because if you write something down for somebody else, you double and triple check whether it's actually correct, and you will read it again, what you're doing, and try it out, so you will become more knowledgeable. So teaching is the best way of learning that involves sharing knowledge, and this will make you more effective. So now, as an overview, 6 of the 7 productivity principles that we have, it's mostly how to embrace automation and trying to focus and eliminate the context switches that we have as humans. Once in a while, taking a step back and seeing what we're doing, and principle of don't make me think, and especially knowing your craft, like reading documentation, producing documentation, sharing and communicating that. And now the 7th productivity principle, that is a little bit counterintuitive. Use the safe time to relax, right? Because being more productive and becoming better at the job, might also lead you to, investing even more time for automation to become even more faster, to get things done even more quicker, so we can, program even more, but this will not end well, right? And one of the most important thing as human beings, because again, we're not computers, we're humans, is, to take a break, to allow your brain to rest in order to function really well, especially if you are in front of a problem that you cannot solve. It helps a lot to do a nap, for example, to take a walk outside, to switch your context deliberately to, once you go back, you actually solve it much quicker. And especially as programmers and, human beings, there is no substitute for, healthy diets, doing sports, and enough sleep. Thank you very much for your attention.